Hello, puppies and kittens. I am talking with Dr. Kip Davis, a renowned Bible scholar, and if he's not, well, then I will renown him.
Uh,
So, so I understand, and I'm in a deplorable situation. I discovered I opened my beer fridge and I realized I have absolutely none.
oh God damn
So
it!
yeah, I'm going to have to
Well,
drink rum. So I
well,
understand you wrote a book.
I wrote a book. Um, I wrote this book. I've actually now on the rumor's been going around that Kip Davis has written no books. This is not the first book that I've written. I've actually written a few. Most people will never read those because they're academic books and they're prohibitively expensive and inaccessible. So I have a handful of books that I often recommend people to go and try and find for free and pirate if they can. But this one is halfway affordable. This is my first trade book. God's Propaganda: Pulling Back the Curtain on What the Bible Wants You to See. So in this is so I'll just maybe just give you a rundown of what the book is. Uh, I was thinking about this actually just a few minutes ago. You and I might have met the first time when I did a course for MVP courses a couple years ago, and you had me on, and we put together a promotional video for it. So the book is based on the course. I was when I was recording for the course, my good friend Dr. Joshua Bowen put the bug in my ear. He said, "Why don't you turn this into a book?" So I started to, and it has been greatly expanded and revised from the course material. So the book itself is an exploration of the biblical text against the cultural historical backdrop of the two kingdoms, Israel and Judah, in the Iron Age. So from like 1000 BC up to, pretty well all the way up to about 200 BCE. And it explores how the biblical texts are interacting with this world of religion and culture and power and politics and just life in the Levant. So my goal, I'm a Bible teacher, so my goal is always to try and help people to understand the text of the Bible better. And I think this book is useful in doing that. I think it helps to make a lot of the text much more interesting, open up people's eyes to some things that maybe they never even thought or seen or considered before, in no small part because most people's access points for the Bible is through English translations or German through translations, and
I have a
not.
question.
Yeah.
Who were you thinking of when you were writing this book? Because the frustrating thing for me when I make a lot of the videos that I do that are counter apologetics is I have a
Mhm.
target audience in mind who I'm sorry to say are not going to be the people who watch the video.
See, that's where I made this book for my audience. So if people I made it for the people who tune into my content on a regular basis and enjoy it. And to that end, it's for people who already have a bit of a bug about the Bible. They're interested in it. They think it's an interesting text. Um and they come to it with a little bit of information and understanding about it already. So I would say it's for the reasonably well informed enthusiast in the first place. So and on
Well, mutual friend Lawrence Yufa just chimed in on the chat. He said that this book you wrote this book for him.
yes, I wrote this book for Lawrence. So
Outstanding.
yeah. I saw somebody else chime in here. If I could touch on something. Um, shoot, now I lost it. Somebody mentioned that they thought that Gad Barnea might disapprove of this. So now I don't know if you're familiar
No,
with
you know,
Gad
you've caught
Barnea.
me in a moment of ignorance. I have no
Uh-oh.
idea what you're talking
That's
about.
okay. I wouldn't expect you two, most people wouldn't. Gad Barnea is he's a scholar in Israel who's done a lot of very good work. In particular, most recently in the Elephantine um, texts and artifacts and the archaeology there. Elephantine is this Jewish community that lived in the Nile Delta at about 400 BCE. And it's very interesting because it provides some of our earliest epigraphic evidence for a Jewish community. And when you actually dig into it, it turns out that they didn't seem to recognize or care a lot about all of the Jewish festivals. They didn't seem to know much about the Torah and the patriarchs and some of these famous biblical characters. They had a temple in which they worshiped the god Yahweh, but also worship other Egyptian gods and seemed to get along just fine this way. So now Gad and a few others have been fond of promoting. They've been really pushing this idea that the Hebrew Bible, at least the Old Testament, is entirely a product of a period later than that. They would say that everything was written in the 3rd century BCE. And I think there's some merit to recognizing that that the texts of the Bible are such that they have undergone a considerable amount of redaction, change, editorial handling. However, I am a firm believer that there is actual some of these things are actually like quite a bit older. There is actual history that you can glean from the text very carefully, because it's not really a history book, and that there is useful information about how people lived and worshipped Yahweh and other gods in the land of Canaan, in the years 1000 to 500 BCE.
With regard to what you just said about it, the Bible not being a history book,
Mhm.
yet everybody who believes in it
Yeah.
insists on trying to turn it into one.
Mhm.
I remember listening to when people are trying to date the different stories of the Bible, like the Exodus, for example. You've got these people who hold this tradition that it had to be around 250 BC or that it had to be 1500 BC.
Mhm.
And the reasons that the people come up with, well, the city of Ramses exists, so it can't have been 1500. It can only have been, but
Mhm.
doing this kind of analysis, or trying to ascertain when this thing was, that gets really tricky. I mean,
It really
and not
does.
just with the Bible. I mean, with the Bhagavad Gita, they did much the same thing. Believers would hold that the book was written 5,000 years ago.
That's wild, right? Yeah.
Yeah, what I
It's
said, believers
yeah,
hold that the
yeah.
Bhagavad Gita was written 5,000 years ago. But then there's contextual elements in it that show that it's around 600 BC, much like a whole plethora of different religious books that came out. The Zoroastrian, the
Mhm.
Avestas of Zarathustra, and Lao Tzu, and Jainism and Buddhism, and just like all of these things like blossom at once, kind of at the same time, around 600 BC.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's and you could set parts of the Bible in that period as well. And on this, so what you said something that I think is really important. You pointed out that that figuring out what is history and teasing that out from what is not can be really challenging. And the reason for that is because the biblical authors, the title on the book is the subtitle is "Pulling Back the Curtain on What the Bible Wants You to See." The writers, the editors of the Bible certainly worked to show you what this facade, to provide this veil of this veneer, in many respects, of historicity, for lack of a better term. There is, one of the interesting features of what we call biblical Hebrew. This is the Hebrew that was in use. Scholars tend to think was in use at the time, from about 800 BCE to 600 BCE, 500 BCE, thereabouts. One of the interesting features of it, and one of the interesting features of Hebrew, or languages that were like Hebrew, that we see written on manuscripts from, or not manuscripts, on artifacts from the Canaanite region, is that, and this is something that scholars have sort of puzzled over for quite some time, is this idea of prosaic narrative, of just writing in the sense of telling this story in the ways that we do now, seems to be something of an innovation that was picked up by whoever wrote the Bible. Now, a lot of Christian apologists will point to this and say, "Look, this is how we know this is history, right? Because they're writing it as if it's history." And I tend to take a fairly different tack on this. I mean, it's quite interesting to me that historical narrative basically runs all the way through from Genesis to the end of Second Kings in the Hebrew texts, Second Chronicles in your English versions. It's all this historical narrative, as if there's no way to tease stories of talking snakes and towers that reach up to the sky, and gods who are separating the waters of the Red Sea with their wind, from stories of kings who went to battle with one another, or who were assassinated and replaced by another dynasty. It's all in there, and it's all kind of democratized using this form of language, and I think that's intentional. I think that's the biblical writers providing you this sense that all of these things are connected. We live in this world that is as much myth and fantasy as it is, reality. And
I don't have a way. I don't have a way of saving the questions when I see them. But there was one
oh,
that I
sorry.
saw that I thought would be of interest to you to answer, and I'll try to keep my eye. I don't have a producer on this one. I should have asked Peter about it, but this was just like last minute.
Whoops.
Yeah,
It was.
yeah. So the question is from Dara O'Kane. I wonder if Egyptian myths have their own take on the Moses story, the day Yahweh tried to attack the Egyptian gods.
Scholars have certainly tried to make connections between the story of the Exodus and some of the textual artifacts that we have from Egypt. I'm not especially convinced by many of those. I know there's there is a story that is quite old about one of the who is it? I think it's like 15th, 14th, 15th dynasty pharaohs. So you're going all the way back into 1700, 1600 BCE, which would be way before the Exodus. And they provide some interesting parallels to how the Exodus story is told, but from the other side. One of the Now, this is helpful in illustrating, I think, one of the important points that scholars have known for a long time, and that is that the Exodus did not happen. Certainly, I think the Exodus is based on some stories that were told by people about escaping slavery from Egypt. Yeah, there were lots of slaves in Egypt, and yes, they left. Some, managed to leave. Maybe a group following a charismatic leader managed to get out, and believed that they were aided by God in so doing. I think the Exodus story is rooted in some real events of Semitic people, early Hebrew people encountering the Pharaoh and facing off against him at the sea and experiencing some kind of victory. But
At
these,
the same time, I've got to interject that there are, when we look at these ancient stories, we want there to be, I think naturally, we want there to be some basis in fact that inspired whatever
yeah,
detail we're reading into the story. But one of the
not
things that
always
I
there.
caution people to remember is, yeah, there were lots of people who escaped slavery. There were even groups of people who escaped
Yeah.
slavery at different times. But when you talk about things like when you get to the shores of the Red Sea and the sea parts, right,
Mhm.
so that they can run through, and
Yeah.
the believer will be talking about, well, how do you explain that? And I have to remind them about the Westcar papyrus from like 1,000 years earlier that talks about a pharaoh who he goes out on a barge. One of those things that the elite get to do that regular people don't get to do. He has this barge. It has all these oars on it, and the rowers are all topless women. So he has
Right.
all these topless women rowing his barge, and he just sits there at the head, watching them all row because it's good to be the king.
Yeah.
And at some point, one of these girls accidentally drops a turquoise bauble over the side of the boat. And the story is the pharaoh at the time, and I can't remember his name, Snefru. Pharaoh Snefru turns to his mage Jajamank because this girl's upset about having lost this little trinket. So Jajamank casts a spell so that they can then pull the water of the lake back as if it was no more than a blanket. So they pull the water of the lake back to reach under to pick up her turquoise thing and then fold the water back where it used to be. And
There you go.
there's two messages with that. And one of them is just the way that people told stories back then.
Yeah.
You weren't expected to believe that all of it actually happened.
Certainly not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then otherwise, with this kind of a precedent, how difficult is it to get the waters to part compared to folding them back like a blanket? That's the much more difficult thing. And that came first. That story was already known in that time, in that place, for 1,000 years before the invention of Moses.
That's very true. And that is, this story of the Exodus, I'm actually pulling up. I talk at one point about what the Exodus story is. This is it's what sociologists and anthropologists like to call a cultural memory, or a social memory, I've heard, or a collective memory. These are all relatively synonymous terms, and this is a story, perhaps grounded in something that might have actually happened, or stemmed from an event of some sort that we just don't have real access to anymore. But these are the sorts of things that get passed down through a collective, a group of people, and it galvanizes them in terms of their own identity, their own self-identification. This is who we are. This is our story. That's kind of what the Exodus is. It's interesting that you mentioned how this looks in a much older text dealing with a similar sort of situation to what we understand the Exodus story to be. But even within the biblical text, and I touch on this at various points in the book, this is a story that has undergone a considerable amount of development, and we can actually access some of these earlier layers of the Exodus story within the biblical text, and it looks different from what we understand it to the famous Cecil B. DeMille story, or the Prince of Egypt story, or there was that one with Christian Bale, which was really not very good, Gods and Kings or something like that.
May I jump in with it for just a moment
Yeah.
to share my preconceptions? I mean, I had a similar feeling when I read through pretty much all the Pentateuch, but especially when we're talking about Exodus, or the Exodus rather. I'm seeing in the way that I'm reading, even if I didn't know about the what was it, the Wellhausen hypothesis, even if I didn't know about all of that, I would recognize that. I mean, we got two sets of commandments right here, and they don't match. There's obviously there are different storytellers, and they're interjecting their bits. They're writing their bits inserting them in different places. So we have different storytellers inserting different things, and they don't all make sense together. And I guess you're just not supposed to make sense out of it all. And with modern believers, I've actually heard them say that one of the things when you read the Bible, that it's important that you believe it before you read it.
It certainly helps you reach the right conclusion, right? So I want you. So the oldest version of this story of the Exodus appears in a text that scholars call the Song of the Sea. This is in Exodus chapter 15, and it has been dated by some as far back as like 1100 BCE potentially. So this is a very, very old text, but I want you to listen to some of this. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I want you to listen to some of this, and especially in keeping with what you described in this older Egyptian myth. I mean, think about how similar this sounds. This is my God, and I will glorify him. The God of my father, I will exalt him. Yahweh is a man of war. His name is Yahweh. The chariots of Pharaoh and army he has cast into the sea. The best of his officers have sunk in the Yam Suf. That's mistranslated often as the Red Sea. It's not that. Some suggest it's the Sea of Reeds, which is an actual marshy lake in Egypt. I actually tend to think it might be the sea at the end, almost like a mythical sea at the end of the world that these people have encountered this victory on. It then says Tehomot, or the deeps, covered them. They went down in the depths like a stone. Your right hand, Yahweh, glorious in strength. Your right hand, Yahweh, shatters the enemy. In your great boasting, you will annihilate those who rise up against you. You send forth your fury. It consumes them like straw. At the blast of your nose, the waters piled up. The floods stood up like a wall. The Tehomot, the deeps, froze in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide spoil. My life shall have its fill of them. I will bear my sword, my hand shall drive them out. You will blow with your wind, the sea covers them. So it folds back over on top of them.
Did
They
you
sank
just
like lead in the mystic waters.
Did you just describe a tsunami?
I don't know. I kind of, right? Although it's the wind, right? It's not the earthquake. It's the
think about the way that what was it? Is it the Epic of Gilgamesh? No, it's the Atrahasis. I'm trying to remember which one describes the flood of Ziusudra, not as a rainstorm, but as a tsunami. That there's this massive,
like a wall of water
that didn't come from the sky. It came from the ground, right? So I wish I could remember which version of it. When I'm reading that, I'm like, that's a tsunami, what that's describing. And then when I read Exodus again, they're led by a pillar of cloud by day, which is a pillar of fire by night. And the only way that you can have those things be the same thing day and night is if we're looking at a volcano. And somebody had asked me in the chat a little while ago, whether people had identified the volcano at the source of Exodus. I remember reading an article that postulated about, or I should say speculated about, 6 different places that could have been the volcano that is depicted as being Mount Sinai. But none of them were necessarily Sinai. Just like Moses, whoever might have been the whatever. Let's say 2 or 3 people that might have been the inspiration for the character of Moses.
Could have been one guy too. We just don't know.
Well, one guy that's covering a lot.
Yeah.
I suspect Moses was at least 4 people.
Okay.
But if you get one guy who inspired any part of that, he gets, nobody knows this name, but they know this name. So if you tell this story and it's attached to this name, and that they did that, right? I mean,
sure.
Yeah. So you have the Moses story that's attributed to like a handful of actual people, and you composite them all into this. Well, the same thing with Mount Sinai, this volcano where they talk about the voice of God being so ominous, and the lightning and the clouds and the thunder and the earthquakes, and you put all of that together, and God moves as a cloud, right? All of that screams volcano to me.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it does, and there have been strong connections made by scholars to, as you pointed out, there's this is a volcanic region, a volcanic area in the Sinai Peninsula. The other thing that we recognize about this place is that the Egyptians had a good deal of interest in this area because they would mine all sorts of metals from the Sinai Peninsula, and we have echoes or hints from within the biblical texts themselves that connect Yahweh worship, the earliest stages of Yahweh worship, to metallurgy. You have a couple of really interesting stories about bronze snakes, in the early stages of Yahweh worship. There's some traditions which say that Yahweh came out of the south, out of the deserts of Edom, which is this area, that he's connected to a group of people known as the Kenites, who are also, within I believe it's Genesis 4. There's a small text that's called the Kenite genealogy, which connects these people to as the inventors of metalworking. So there, people understand, or they have some sort of historical recognition of all these things, that this is all where Yahweh came from. This is part of our heritage as a people who worship this deity. One of the unique things about the God Yahweh, and this is consistent throughout the biblical text, but seems to be a feature of reality as well, is that Yahweh is a God who's imported into Israel, into the land of Canaan from outside, and this seems to be in keeping. When you look at the archaeological record, this is what you see, that it seems like somebody brought the worship and the observance of this deity into the region, that he was not native to the land of Canaan. And this ended up becoming a part of, like, a feature of his identity all throughout the biblical texts. So I wanted to point out one other thing within this old story of the Exodus in the Song of the Sea, and that's how it ends here. We all know and we all recognize how the Exodus story that we're most familiar with.
And just remind us, this is the earliest part.
This is the earliest version.
Influenced the story of the Exodus.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So we're all familiar with the story of Moses leading the people. You'll notice there's no Moses in this particular story itself. It's just not there. The other thing, we know that Moses led the people across the sea. The Pharaoh's army died in the sea, And then they spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness before eventually getting into the land of Canaan and eradicating all the people who lived there in order to take their inheritance in the land. Listen to how this very, very old story of the Exodus ends. So after God has drowned Pharaoh and his army in the sea, it says this: the people hear, they tremble. Agony grips the residents of Philistia. Now are the chiefs of Edom horrified. The rulers of Moab, trembling, will seize them. All the dwellers in Canaan have melted. Terror and dread are falling upon them. Dread, by your strong arm, they are still as stone. Until your people advance, Yahweh, until your people advance, those whom you acquired. You will bring them and plant them on the mountain of your heritage, the place you made your abode, Yahweh, the sanctuary, my Lord, which your hands established. Yahweh, you will reign forever and ever. Now, what that sounds to me like when I read that old version of the story is that the people go into the land and they wipe out these residents there, the Canaanites, the Edomites, the Moabites, the Philistines, which, interestingly enough, aren't part of the catalog of nations that that Joshua and his army wipe out in the book of Joshua. But then it sounds like it says that they built a temple for this god on a mountain in the land. This is just not the story that we know. This is a different kind of story. Now, I know I noticed that somebody had mentioned Manetho earlier, quite a bit earlier in the chat, because Manetho was an Egyptian writer in I believe late 4th, early 3rd century BCE, who tells and a version of the Exodus story that when you read it, it looks very, very different from the Exodus story that we're all much more familiar with. When you read Manetho's version of the Exodus story, it actually looks a little bit like this in the Song of the Sea. It talks about Moses leading the people out of it. That one has Moses in it. It's quite a bit later, but he's leading the people out of Egypt and into the land of Canaan, and he builds a temple, a city and a temple. That's how Manetho's story ends. But these stories changed, they evolved, they were malleable for a long period of time.
And everything we're talking about right now is part of the book, right?
Yes, all of this is in the book. I might not.
I worried when I seemed to sidetrack at some point that I didn't want to take us off of that. One of the important things is I've interviewed a number of authors, and usually I can read the book before I do the interview, and so I know what kind of questions to tailor.
I heard you saying just the other day that you just have no time to read, and it's very frustrating for you. And
it is.
I totally get that. There's an audio book coming, by the way. So
excellent, because I do also do a lot of road trips, and so that's the perfect time.
Excellent
to play something while I'm driving.
Yep.
And it's been hugely to my benefit when I get to interview authors and I have read the books, because so far they've all been really good. So it's frustrating when I don't have. I love to be on the learning curve. I love to continue knowing, or even finding out that I didn't know what I thought I did. I like to improve. And so it's frustrating to me that I didn't get a chance to read this, but I don't know how to tailor the questions accordingly.
Yeah.
Please forgive me for that.
And that's fine. And I think really, like, the book itself is very wide ranging. Like it covers a ton of different topics and different material related to the Bible. And just to give there's 17 chapters, and I've divided it into 4 parts, just to give you an idea. Part 1, I've called the known world, which is like background knowledge, background information about the religions and the history of Israel and the people and the events behind the biblical text. So I talk about geography. I talk about basic social organization. I
And we
introduce
were talking about between 500 BC and
about 1000 BC to 200 BC.
to
So like this
200.
800-year period. So I've got a chapter in here that's a primer basically on various different types of ancient Near Eastern literature. And then in part 2, which I've titled Universal Truths, I talk about the gods, who they are, what they did. I introduce Yahweh. What kind of a deity was this, and how did he fit into this larger picture? I talk about I dedicated individual chapters to each of the 2 creation stories, which are fundamentally very different from one another, not just in terms of how they were written or by whom they were written, but in terms of how they're imagining the world. And then I move on from there to part 3, which I've called institutions, and these are just various um, various social institutions for life. So I have an entire chapter devoted to family construction, a chapter devoted to what constitutes a member of the Sons of Israel, ethnic identity. What do we do? I have a chapter called propaganda where I look and say, what do we do with the Hebrew Bible text when it doesn't align so closely with what we see in the archaeological record? And then I actually go and spend some time in another chapter investigating the archaeological record itself. And I finish up with a lengthy chapter about the institution of the king and the prophets and how this actually worked out in society. And I go into quite a bit of detail in that chapter on this figure, David. Lots of scholars will tell you this wasn't a real person, and maybe he wasn't. I tend to I like the idea that he was. I'll admit that just because the stories are so great that are in the Bible. And I think there's people, when they look at them with fresh eyes and they gain a clearer understanding of how some of these stories work, they become much more interesting. And then part 4 of the book is titled Ritual, Space, and Knowledge, and this is where I talk about the temple, and I talk about sacrifices, the sacrificial system, which is fundamental. It's central to the religious ideology of these people. I have a chapter dedicated to the pedagogical material of the ancient people, the ways in which they taught one another within the upper echelons of these societies. They were reading and writing things. What was their curricula, their education? And I finish up with a chapter that I've entitled The Empire of the Walking Dead. And this is my chapter all about apocalypticism. And I think it's fitting that it's the last chapter in the book because of how deeply apocalypticism as a worldview, as an ideology, informs not just the later readers of the Bible, but has come to inform our modern Western world. Whether people recognize it or not, we live in a post-Christian society, a post-Christian culture, but I mean, with an emphasis on Christian there for the longest time. European American civilization was grounded in Christianity, which is ultimately a form of apocalypticism. So I think it's really important for people to understand that an apocalyptic worldview in terms of helping us to understand the ways in which we have been trained and in some ways indoctrinated into reading and understanding the text. And if we unravel that, I think it's helpful for everyone. Sorry, I went rambling on there for a while.
You have a tendency to do that, but it's always
You've
good.
seen that, right? You recognize that?
Yeah.
Listen,
Yeah, well,
I
as
like
I
to
said,
talk.
go
You
ahead.
give me the I say I like to talk, and you give me the opportunity, and I probably won't shut up for a while. So
That is quite all right. That's what you're here for. Okay, so I wish I had the opportunity to read the book. I mean, there is and one of the interesting things about atheists when we're studying the Bible, we have these critics who say that, you spend an awful lot of time talking about the Bible for somebody who doesn't believe in it. But I've seen people dedicate. I saw this one guy wrote a thesis on his analysis of The Big Lebowski,
Yeah.
or that there's like teams of people that just analyze Pulp Fiction, right? So we're talking
There's
about a movie.
film critics, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what they do. Yeah. So sorry, I interrupted you. Did you or do you just want me to speak?
They don't get that kind of criticism, but what we're talking about, something adjacent to literature that has a significant social impact, and so there's value in understanding that.
100%. I think it's super important that we understand it. Like with the impact that the Bible has had on our whole culture. I think I say at one point in the book, if you speak English, then the Bible has impacted your world, whether you know it or not. Like it just has. But part of the problem here, and you see this, lots of the people in your audience see this, that, and it's frustrating that the Bible has such a hegemonic grip on our culture that it affects life in ways that it probably shouldn't. And it does so because there's so many people who are committed to this idea that this is a divine book, that this is the word of God, that this is God's message to mankind. And I tend to think like, oh, I'm trying my utmost to humanize the book. It becomes much more interesting when you recognize that this is literature written by people, for their world and their audience, and in so doing, uh, we are better for gaining an understanding of what the Bible actually is, and in that respect, I think it empowers us a great deal to disarm it. When you come to the point of recognizing, when you become convinced that, yeah, this is just a fascinating collection of ancient literature, when you get to that point, then, it becomes all that much more easier. Was that English? It becomes
No,
much
no.
easier. No, it was not. Sorry. It becomes that much easier to take it seriously in a different way, I think a healthier way, not as directives by fiat from a God on high, but as the imperfect grapplings of people with in many respects an ancient world that was frustratingly beyond their control, and which was, controlling the world in which they lived was very much a part of this project. And when we come to see that, then we can start to be honest about the kind of impact that the Bible has had on our culture and our civilization, and how to undo some of the unhealthy parts of that. So
I have one more vaguely related question. And there was a time when I was a neo-pagan spiritualist. I believed in reincarnation. I believed that life was animated by a supernatural life force, that when we die, that the life ebbs out of us, and that it's more or less like particulate matter, like water. That like when you make a clay sculpture, the sculpture is only malleable because it's wet. Right. But then when the clay dries, well, then all the water's evaporated out of it, dust to dust. Where does the water go? The water doesn't go back to dust. It goes back into the hydrosphere. So I had this concept of the spiritual world where I'm literally one with everything. I just have this little bit, this 8-ounce glass of water is me. and then it's going to be poured out into the rest of all of this. And I had this kind of a spiritualism as a young man, and if I could look at the video library that I've created as an adult, if you were to tell me at 20, 22, something like that, the spiritualist that I was,
way back there, all right,
the occultist that I was, if you were to tell me that I would be this hardcore atheists now, who talks about everything that I believe in this point is wrong. You won't believe the things that you do now when you're older, right? I mean, how would it? And I'm thinking about 19, 20-year-old me seeing what I have become, and then watching those videos to see if it would convince me. You were a Christian. You were a Bible believing Christian
at one point. Yeah.
And now look at not just this book, as you said, this is not your first book, but look at the library of work that you've done. So I'm going to talk to I'm going back in time. I'm going to talk to the young you.
Mm-hmm.
Or you go back.
I was less pleasant and charming. The young me might have been a bit of a dick sometimes. So,
I know I was, so it's all right.
Right. I think that's 20-year-old boy shit more than anything. So, go back and talk to my 20-year-old self. And I think so. I think that is you. You asked me earlier who I wrote the book for, and I wrote the book for my audience, right? And there's a lot of people in my audience who are older, who are embarking on an intellectual journey later in life, and I think that there is tremendous value in just continuing to learn, to pursue gaining an understanding and a humility before the things that we don't know. And I think the young me, if he would listen, I would probably start by telling him to shut the fuck up and recognize that he's a young man who has a lot to learn, but to just take hold of that and to never stop learning, because that's how I got here. Is I always something that was always there. I grew up as a Bible believing Christian. Yes, I grew up. I was sort of ingrained with a strong appreciation and a love for the Bible from early on. I tell a couple of stories in the book about young me. A couple of things that my parents bought for me and my brother were a picture Bible. Are you familiar with this one? It's like
I only know the brick Bible.
Oh, that was so much better. The picture Bible is much older. The picture Bible was published in like the late 1970s, and
I had that.
Did you? The comic book,
it's
but
like
big.
An oversized comic book, and it showed, if I remember, Satan character with the serpent in the garden was like Temnus. What the fuck? I'm trying to remember. There was a species, a paleontological species.
Oh, really?
That matched. It was a very snaky body, but it had legs that it could walk around on, and the legs are really far from each other. So it's like,
I don't remember that, but
I think it's the same. It's a comic book.
Yeah, but it's big, right? Like it's a big book because there's.
I was like
a giant graphic novel.
I was 11, I think, when I got this. So this would have been 1973, 74.
Yeah. See, I was, I'm close, not quite as old as you are, but close. But so my parents got this book I wore the cover off of that thing because I read it over and over and over. I loved it. And another thing that my parents purchased for my brother and me was a set of Cassette tapes. You remember those, right? It was literally, it was like a suitcase of like sorry, I'm bumping my mic. It's like this big suitcase of cassette tapes. I believe there were like 80 of these individual tapes, and it was like the Bible in the form of radio plays from start to finish. And it was extremely well done. And likewise, I listened to these things over and over again, because I had from an early time this fascination with these stories, with this place in Israel, Palestine. I had a fascination from an early, even though I couldn't read any of this stuff, I had a fascination with just the fact that these were texts written in Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic. And all of this stuff I carried with me into adulthood. And when I started learning about the Bible, this is really what pushed me through that. It was my love and appreciation for the text. I carried that with me. I still hold on to it to this day. I actually have a T-shirt that says I fucking love the Bible on it, right? Because it's true. Like it's it's the thing that you don't dedicate over 20 years of your life in school. You don't pay for that. You don't make the kind of sacrifices that you do in order to gain that sort of an appreciation or an education. You don't do that if you hate the thing that you're studying. So, and I think that's, that's probably something else that I would tell my young self, is that I know you love this book. I understand how much you love it, but I think I can make you, if you listen to me, if you're gonna hear what I have to tell you now, I can make it alive for you. I can show you just how much more interesting and how much more incredible and provocative and terrifying this book is than you can imagine, because you don't really understand it yet. So, and that's
There's
what I'm trying to do in the book.
one more comment I've got to read before we go. Franielli Apollinario, $20. I'm sorry, I messed up the pronunciation. I wasn't trying to. $20. Thank you very much for that. Says, you guys look like members of a metal band.
That's
I love
intentional.
both of your guys' work. Now more than ever before, this country needs voices like yours to counteract the ignorance, disinformation, and misinformation.
Absolutely.
I want to make a video just on the misinformation that we're having with the way that we can't trust anything anymore. We can't trust anything the president says. We can't trust anything. If you look up the jobs report and you look up on like the whitehouse.gov, you'll get a different report than if you look at house.gov, right? And and then everything is AI. So, and half the people you're talking to on social media don't even exist.
And how terrifying that the president can't seem to know the difference himself. He can't even recognize,
even when he's the AI.
Yes. Yeah. Or when he's asking governors, well, I saw this on TV. What do you mean this isn't real? Jesus Christ.
So there are some people who want to understand and improve understanding, and I'm glad to say that you are one of those people. And so it's a pleasure to have you on and to talk to you about this. And everybody, buy the book. It's Amazon. I put a link in the description.
It's available in ebook. You can get it on Kindle. There's a paperback and a hardcover. There will be. It's not available for Apple Books yet. And that's a file formatting issue that I'm currently trying to correct, but it will be soon. And the audiobook is coming. I am narrating it myself, and it's a lot of work. So It's it's a big goddamn book. So it takes a long time to actually read through it all.
Oh,
But
and one other thing I've got to say before I go: Seeker of Truth just told a lie. Seeker of Truth says everyone has faith in something, atheist or theist. We can never full know anything, let alone God or no God. No, that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what faith is. Faith is the most dishonest position it is possible to have, because it means believing something when there is no evidence for it, and believing something even when the evidence is against it. You're going to believe it because you want to believe it. Maybe you've based your belief on an assumption of authority, but it wasn't indicated by evidence, and it's not going to be changed because of evidence either. So no, we don't all have faith. I'm an epistivist. I reject faith as the most dishonest position it is possible to have, and it is also exclusively auto-deceptive. So didn't mean to detract from your interview. It's just, I hate that comment that, well, we all have faith in something. No, we fucking don't.
No,
Thank you.
we
Dr.
don't.
Jeff Davis.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure.